Call the meeting to order, and we will get started. Welcome everyone to the weekly Rotary Club of Jonesboro meeting. Reigning District 6150 Club of the Year. Ring the bell. All right. Inspirational moment. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. Harriet Tubman. For today's program, I'll turn it over to Gregory Hansen to introduce our program.
I've known my friend Marcus Tribbett now for about 20 years when I first arrived in Jonesboro, and he's been just a terrific asset to the university. He has a background in anthropology from Harvard and has made really good contributions to that. But a lot of his specialty has to do with English literature. So he has his MA from Northern Arizona University, and then he completed his doctorate at Washington State University. In addition to teaching a whole range of really courses, his range of classes and interests are just really impressive and really makes him a lot of fun to talk to, because you can sit down and talk to him about things ranging from blues to ballads to film to fiction, cultural studies, a whole range of things. He also works with our Heritage Studies program, and also is very involved with a whole range of activities at the university. So we're really glad to have him make a contribution. But Marcus is also a guitar player and very much into music. So I guess we should have like a Rotary jam or something sometime. And he has a lot of other interests in things like photography. And I think a lot of this comes together so well with his work as a general editor for the Arkansas Review, because the Arkansas Review isn't just typical scholarly writing, although there's some really terrific scholarship in it. It also features a whole range of creative expressions. And I'm glad he can talk about his work with the Arkansas Review, because I think there's something there that would appeal to really anybody in Rotary. So we're really glad to have Marcus as our speaker today, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Tribbett.
Well, thanks a lot, Gregory. That's quite kind. I'm going to share, I'm going to be sharing a lot of different things, but I'll share first a recent cover. So Arkansas Review, subtitle, A Journal of Delta Studies, is a nonprofit scholarly journal. It's housed at Arkansas State University. We're in the College of Liberal Arts and Communication, formerly Humanities and Social Sciences. It's been at the university since 1996. I have a whole editorial team that includes the managing editor, Janelle Collins, the creative materials editor, Kim Ariel, poetry editor, Brian Moore, creative prose editor, John Abernathy, art editor, Kim Vickery, and all of those are professors in the English and Philosophy department, with the exception of John Abernathy, who's an academic advisor for the College of Fine Arts. We also have an editorial board that includes a number of different ASU faculty in relevant academic disciplines. That includes a few Rotary members. Then I have graduate assistants and also editorial interns, a sort of rotating cast there. The editorial interns are undergraduates. And I also have an advisory board that's mostly ceremonial, although they chip in now and then. They include former editors and some scholarly luminaries in relevant fields related to our focus. So what we publish, we are regionally focused, publishing scholarship and creative material related to the 7 states of the lower Mississippi Delta region. And that's something that is often a little bit tough to define, but I'm going to just pull up Google Earth here for you. So we're about here. And we define the lower Mississippi Delta. You can really kind of see it on the map geographically in this lighter colored area here. So we define it from St. Louis to New Orleans, essentially. And that definition geographically takes in the delta itself, which you can tell from the color of the map that it's particular kind of geography. But defining it a little bit more broadly, culturally, I include really the area that runs from the southern part of Illinois and the southern half of Missouri down through this chunk of Kentucky, a bit of Tennessee, all of Mississippi, all of Louisiana. And of course, since we're Arkansas Review, I count all of Arkansas. So even if it's from way over here, Eureka Springs, I would still consider it for our focus. I think culturally, the definition is more broad because all of these regions that immediately surround the Delta feed into the Delta. And there's lots of ways in which the Delta is kind of a touchstone against which other areas identify themselves. So that's, I'd say too, that I sometimes take, for example, stories that might be set just slightly on the edge of our region. I once had a story that actually took place on the Missouri River about a fisherman. And by the end of the story, the fisherman's boat has drifted all the way down to New Orleans. So even though most of the story takes place outside of the region, I thought it's an interesting way in which other regions feed into ours. So I thought I would include that story as well. So let me get back out of here and start sharing our website. Actually, first, I'll just share a cover, one of my favorite covers. Should be a sunset cover of from 2009. Is that what you're seeing? Yes, okay. So what we actually publish in terms of scholarship is interdisciplinary. We welcome original contributions from all the humanities and social sciences, including anthropology, art history, folklore studies, history, literature, musicology, political science, and sociology. These scholarly academic articles are aimed at a general academic audience, so they're not like specialist articles necessarily, although they do go through academic review before publication. The creative material we publish includes fiction, short stories, poetry, essays, visual art, photography. The creative material needs to focus or evoke or respond to the Delta cultural and natural experience. Non-Delta related material isn't considered. So if we don't see a connection, even if it's good material, we don't publish it. The photography we publish is encouraged either as standalone submissions, photo essays, or sometimes accompanying other types of essays. I like to have good photographs to fill in my layout where I have space too. So I'm always on the lookout for interesting photography. The material or the scholarly material is, as I said, it's refereed by relevant editors and an outside reader, at least one. Occasionally we do special issues that focus on a particular topic. We are a nonprofit and we don't pay for submissions. Our contributors are paid in copies of the magazine and exposure. So when we publish is 3 times a year. Now, that's always been kind of a tough thing to define. Is that Triennially? No, I don't think so. That means every 3 years. Is that trimestrially? Maybe, except for that means every 3 months, and we publish every 4 months. So whenever I get the question, I just say 3 times per annum or 3 times per year. We publish in April, August, and December. I'm going to share our website now while I'm talking. I'll let that, I have a slider at the top that'll go through some full cover images. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about the history and how it came to be at ASU. Originally, the journal was called Kansas Quarterly, and it actually has origins all the way back to the 1930s. It was originally a magazine called Kansas Magazine, and then by the late 60s, it began being published as a literary journal at Kansas State University. And it proceeded there until 1993, when essentially a number of their original editorial team retired. They lost funding, and through the efforts of several people at ASU, we kind of scooped up the journal and brought it here. It was first brought in under the editorship of Norman Lavers, who was a creative writing professor who's now retired. And he published originally the last issue of Kansas Quarterly. He published a gigantic 4-volume issue, because part of the deal for bringing it here was that we would publish all of the accepted submissions that were still outstanding. And so he published one gigantic issue in 94, 95, skipped the publication year of 95, and then began in 96 with it as Arkansas Review. And I'll share just for a second the first cover from that. Let me get to the right window on mine. So this is Arkansas Review, and you'll notice it says Kansas Quarterly at the top. So for 1 year in 1996, it was being published as Kansas Quarterly Arkansas Review. And there was this interesting logo here that has KQ and AR that was designed. I'm not sure who designed that logo, but this is, I believe this is a Carol Clore painting. And that was the very first issue published with Arkansas Review in the title. Now, for 2 years in 96 and 97, Professor Lavers was publishing it still as a literary journal. The next year, he started publishing it as Arkansas Review, formerly the Kansas Quarterly. Can you see that one? Yeah. So we still have the symbol here, Arkansas Review, formerly the Kansas Quarterly. And at this point, it's still a literary journal. And then the following year, in 1998, it becomes, oops, that's the wrong one. Sorry about that. This one. It becomes Arkansas Review, a journal of Delta Studies. Now, this was the idea of Professor Bill Clements, who took over the general editorship and decided that it should become a journal that still has a creative materials component, but also includes scholarship and information about and pertaining to this region. And interesting tie-in, I arrived at Arkansas State in 1997 as the spouse of a brand new professorial hire. And there was this new journal coming out, and they were doing a special issue that was going to deal with the blues, their first issue. And I had just published or just finished my dissertation a year before, and I had a chapter that I thought would work and revised it into an article. So in 1998, in the very first issue of Arkansas Review, a Journal of Delta Studies, I have an article on a blues performer called Memphis Minnie. At the time, I had no idea that in 20 years I would be, or 15 years, I would be the general editor of Arkansas Review. But here I am 15 years later. So Bill's idea for what the journal could be is basically what we still do. He was general editor for about 5 years, and then Tom Williams took over. Tom Williams was a creative writing professor here in the first decade of the 21st century. He's now Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at University of Central Arkansas. So let me get back. I want to share the website again, because that's where most of the cool stuff is. Oh, well, first I'll share Tom's first issue. And then in 2009, Janelle Collins took over, and her first issue had an article about the Mark Twain Museum. So that's her first cover. So I took over as general editor on, let's see, I think sometime around this issue with the horse here, that one. And basically I had been being the production editor and the managing editor for a number of years. Janelle Collins is my spouse, by the way, and she became chair of the English department and just didn't have time to continue on as the general editor. And so I became general editor at that point. And for a long time, we had a kind of static website, didn't have a lot of interactivity. And one of the things that I wanted to do a number of years ago was to try to create a more visually interesting website that also had some clickable links so that you could have a taste of what we have in the journal. And so I worked with IT and put together this ever-evolving site. Normally, I just have one current issue up, but I like this cover so much here that I left it up just for y'all so I could show you on the website. This was taken last summer, really basically in my backyard. It's just a great sunset we had in July. This latest issue is kind of meant to evoke 2020 and what a kind of tortured year it was, and how at the end of 2020 we had a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. So with each of the issues on the website, I have a clickable link which takes us to the table of contents so you can get an idea of the kind of things that we publish. This is the latest issue. It includes, excuse me, an article about a forgotten poet. His name was Kenneth Lawrence Bodwin. He was a Memphis poet. And a number of pieces of fiction and poetry, an interview with an author named Mary Troy, a photo essay, sections on Delta sources and resources, and book reviews. Here's an example of the kind of photography that we would publish as standalone. I just thought this was a really great picture. It's a carousel in Meridian, Mississippi. It was sent as a standalone, and I had half a page at the end of the table of contents, so I put it there. And I thought I captured again, this sort of idea of 2020 as a year where everything sort of stopped. And, you know, it's like life arrested kind of as we existed in 2020. So anyhow, let me get back out of here. We published a lot of different kind of scholarship. Just that I tend to, in the featured content, I don't put a lot of our scholarly work because we have agreements with scholarly databases, and they pay us. And so I don't make the scholarly stuff available for free. And I usually will use creative material. There is one, I think I have one here from 2015, which is an article about Mose Allison. And an interesting part of this particular article is that he's talking about the use of album covers to convey messages about the kind of music and the style of music in the 1960s. So he's making a distinction between country and country blues and jazz, and trying to fit Mose Allison in with this tradition iconographically. So that's a bit of scholarship. We also do quite a number of interviews. I think this one here has an interview. We don't just do interviews with authors, although most of our interviews are with authors. For example, a couple issues ago, we had an interview and a profile of Webb Hubbell. I don't know if you know that Webb Hubbell, who was in the Clinton administration, actually writes kind of detective thrillers, mysteries now, and it's a number of different novels. So we had an interview with him a couple issues ago, but this particular issue is with a graphic novelist who's originally from Little Rock. His name is Nate Powell, and I included some pictures in this one of his novel covers, but he's pretty famous now. He was right on the verge of famous when we published this. He's pretty famous for this particular series, which is called March, and which is about the civil rights era and about John Lewis. He's published, I think, 3 versions. The story is 3 volumes. So this was March book 1, right as it was coming out. So I felt like we got a little bit of a coup by having Nate Powell at that point. We have a lot of poetry. I thought I could read you a little bit of our poetry if you'd like. Since so much of what we do is trying to define exactly, what the delta is, and there's a long running series that's called What is the Delta? And it's the delta from various perspectives. Might be from a environmentalist perspective. It might be from a literary perspective. It might be from a food waste perspective or an anthropological one. So Janelle actually published a book a number of years ago now, about 5 years ago now. It's called Defining the Delta, which is from that series, a number of different essays that how to think about this region. But I'm going to read a little bit from this special issue we published, which was a special issue on poetry and Delta poets. And this first one is by Margaret Jones Bolsterly, who's a retired creative writing professor from University of Arkansas. She's better known for nonfiction work than she is for poetry, but she has obviously published some poetry. So this one is called Which Delta Did You Mean? And it's the lead poem in this issue. This issue had a number of different essays and a few interviews with poets, and essays about poets and interviews with poets. And then it had the second half of the issue was all poetry. So which delta did you mean? The one I carry like a template from childhood and place over every new landscape, hoping to find it again. That huge, flat, luscious land under a limitless sky with cypress trees and knees in shallow water. The one with the sound like drums, my dancing pony's hooves made on ground rich enough to make a broomstick sprout. The one with tales of the courage the old ones brought to cut the forest and rip a life from that land wild enough and wet enough to nurture vipers, mosquitoes, chiggers, army worms, boll weevils, ticks and fevers unknown in the civilized world. The one where gentleness and manners were treasures a family passed along. The one where white and black with careful courtesy respected intertwined lives for generations. Or the one I drive through now, land lying flat and open under the limitless sky, raped to produce more than even that rich soil was meant to, crops covered with cancerous poison to kill the weeds and endless insects, white and black at odds in a pot boiling over after simmering for almost 200 years, recognition of what it cost to tame this place and who it was who paid the price, admission that the old ones who marched off to war to defend their right to own human beings were wrong. What haunts us now is knowing they are both the same, stanza 2, an overlay of stanza 1, or vice versa, each a template for the other. So that was the lead poem into this issue on Delta poetry, contemporary Delta poetry we're talking about. Joe Mcdougall, I'll read just one really short one. Joe Mcdougall is the poet laureate of Arkansas, and she's from, I didn't mention that Margaret Jones Bolserly's from Desha County, I believe. Joe is from DeWitt, Arkansas originally. Both of these poets grew up deep Delta. I'm including this one, Rivers. I'll read it in part to kind of pat us on the back a little bit, because this poem was selected in 2019 for a Pushcart Prize, which is a prestigious national award for poetry and fiction. We were featured in their 2020 volume called Best of the Small Presses, and Joe won her first Pushcart. She's been nominated several times, but this was the one that finally won it for her. So I'm kind of proud of that, and very happy for her. She's a lovely woman who's come here many times to read. So next time she comes back, I will make sure that everybody in Rotary knows. I forgot to mention, that's another thing that we do with Arkansas Review. We sponsor a lot of different readings of poetry fiction and also lectures and so forth. We were one of the sponsors that brought in Joy Harjo, the National Poet Laureate. How long ago has that been now? This last year has taken so much out of everybody. I think that was only about a year ago, but it seems like it was 5 years ago. Anyway, this poem is called Rivers. Rivers are born unlucky. They bloat, they freeze, they curate dead bodies nibbled to lace. You may think them postcard picturesque, calm as storks winding through aspens. What do you know? This is not their warp. They rankle, they plot, they have the soul of a snake, and yet they seduce. You stand on the banks of a majestic one, gawking. It sends a rat to your ankles. I have many, many examples of poems. I'll read a quick one in Greg's honor, because Gregory is a huge Ozzie Smith fan. And some of you are probably Cardinals fans, right? So this is from a poet named C.L. Bledsoe. This was published a couple years ago. And he's originally from Wynn. He lives, I can't remember, I think South Carolina or North Carolina now. This is called The Wizard. If baseball is America, then America is Ozzie Smith. Number 1, man on fire doing backflips across the field, more magic than mountain. My big brother and I would make the trip to St. Louis once a year, a 5-hour drive that took us 2 days round trip. Stay in a cheap motel, me scrunching down in the car and then sequestered in the room so the management wouldn't charge us for 2. Feasting on the same fast food from different joints, uncomfortable seats under a sweat-inducing sun, and people almost as strange as us, until the wizard took the field with the handstand. Go crazy, folks, go crazy. An agitated atom in a field of static forms. We were there to see perfection. If Ozzy couldn't catch it, it couldn't be caught. We have sort of a baseball theme that runs through. I don't think it's intentional necessarily, but we have actually a number of different pieces over the years that have dealt with baseball. I'll show you one that I thought might be interesting for you all here. This one was about 10 years ago. It's called Farmers and Fastballs. It's about minor league baseball in this region in Northeast Arkansas in the Depression era, so in the 1930s era. There's some really interesting photographs that were included. Paul Edwards is, I believe he's a librarian or an archivist. He's at this time, I don't know now, but at this time, I believe he lived in Massachusetts. But there's a whole range of photographs. This was a black baseball team called the Claybrook Tigers. Evidently, Claybrook is a town that no longer exists anymore. They were a professional team, essentially bankrolled by a very wealthy businessman, and they played against really all comers, right? They played against Negro League teams and anybody else who would play, and they won a lot. They only lasted a couple years. This guy here, Gus Happy Foreman, played for a team out of Osceola. He had been a major leaguer, kind of off and on, had a career for 6 or 8 years in the major leagues, and eventually led this Osceola team where in 1929 he batted .608 for the season. He was way outclassing the competition, I guess, right? And then there's a second half of the article talks a little bit about Paragould team that was, I believe they were called the Paragould Browns. They were a minor league team for the St. Louis Browns. And so Paul Edwards, who wrote this, interviewed some folks in Paragould that had been involved. And there were a number of different teams in Northeast Arkansas. It was originally organized by several Jonesboro businessmen. So I just kind of picked this one out because I thought it has a lot of local interest. This is an example of a sort of historical piece of scholarship. We have a lot of different things like that, including articles on Osage removal from Arkansas, just any number of things. I'll read you one more poem, and then I'll show you a little bit more. I like these poems. These are by Gail Acuff, who is a Southerner, not exactly from our region, but writes in ways that I think relate really well. These are a whole set of poems called the Miss Hooker poems. He writes about his Sunday school teacher. This one's called Dispensation. At Sunday school today, I didn't see the light like the song says I should. What I saw was Miss Hooker's red hair. I see it every Sunday, but this morning it was different somehow. More like blood, I guess, but it wasn't dripping from her head like the blood from Jesus' side, where they pierced him with a spear, a Roman spear. The blood he bled for me, Miss Hooker likes to say, but I guess the Romans helped was what I would have interrupted her to say in class, but instead I kept my trap shut and let her go on with it again. But it seems to me that if mankind is sinful, then we must be helping to get ourselves out of sin. The way Mother tells me when I spend the night at a friend's house not to embarrass her and Father, but be somebody, she says. So I surrender, and anyway, sin's not as fun away from home as in it. One day I'll marry Miss Hooker, bloody red hair and all, and we'll have a family. Babies, I mean, one after another, like Pez. And forget that she's 25 to my 10. I'll catch up eventually and keep her younger. And anyways, she's my ticket to heaven. I'll bet she never sins, or not much, not so as you can tell, even though she says that all folks come short of the glory of God. She's too modest. I just like Gail Acuff's stuff. It's very humorous, as you can tell. I want to show you a little bit more just of other kind of things that we feature. So we do photo essays. This is a color one. Jason Stark's a photographer who lives in Osceola, and he does really interesting things with color and shadow. He likes to take kind of derelict building pictures. That one's from Bondsville. He takes these photos and washes them out. I don't know exactly what the process is. This one I liked so much that I later used it, part of it anyway, as a cover. This is, I think, let's see, maybe the Capitol building in Osceola. I'm not sure. So a number of different photographs. I've used some of these or similar ones as these for covers over the years. For example, this cover here comes from that. So let's see. I've talked about scholarship, interview, poetry, photography. I want to tell you a little bit about one of our sections that I think you would be interested in, and that is our Delta sources and resources section. So we have two sections that recur. Our book reviews, where we review scholarly and creative work pertaining to the region or by authors from the region. And so I have the book review section, which I make freely available on the website since 2013. Eventually, I'll go back and add more. And then Delta Sources and Resources, which are kind of informational articles that cover libraries, museums, festivals, online resources, and so forth that pertain to the Delta. And I'll show this one here because it has a lot of color in it. It's an interesting one. This is from a number of years ago now, but it's the Missouri Folk Arts Program. And so we always have a bit of illustration that goes in with these. Sometimes museum gift shops and so forth will carry these. I just thought this one has a lot of interesting color to it. That's not part of the Missouri Folk Arts Center, but it was a nice picture that I thought was evocative. So we've been running that for a number of years. The most recent one was on Lepanto Terrapin Derby. I wrote this one. This year's been really tough to get these because usually I have a writer who visits when they're actual sites. She goes and visits them and then takes photographs and writes the articles. That was impossible to do this year, really. And so I did a couple of them that I could do basically as internet research. But this is a photograph from Gregory Hansen, and we're going to run a photo essay that focuses on the Lepanto Terrapin Derby. This is one of the last Terrapin Derbies in the state, by the way. And last year was the first year that it hadn't happened since, I don't know, 1930. So hopefully it'll come back. So that's the kind of things that we publish. There's really lots more types of things. This is the King Biscuits Blues Festival. We have a number of different museums. I could randomly click. I don't know if I'll get a museum. No, I'm getting a lot of festivals. Let's see if I can get a museum. There's Louisiana State University Rural Life Museum. We've had one on the A-State Museum. Anyhow, that's more or less what we do and who we are. And I would entertain any questions.
How do you get copies? Is it by subscription only?
More or less. We do sell standalone copies if we have them. There are a few issues where we don't have any back issues. I have in the archives, I actually have all of the issues from the last almost 25 years, going all the way back. So if there was one, they're also indexed with tables of contents. So if there's one that you are particularly interested in, the way to do that is to contact us from the sales link here. We don't do it electronically. It's basically through emailing the managing editor. You didn't really ask this question, but I guess I'll answer it, which is how many subscribers do we have? A lot of our subscribers are institutional subscribers, and I mentioned that we have databases that pay for access to all the material. EBSCO is the primary one. Most of our impact is through that. We have at any one time 300 to 400 subscribers. So as an academic journal, we're probably more impactful through online databases than we are as hard copy in hand issue. That said, I'm proud of what we produced. I think they're beautiful. And I didn't give a shout out to the ASU print shop. I definitely should do that. They are phenomenal and have been printing our issues since it came to A-State. And they do an excellent job.
Any other questions for Marcus?
Who supplies your budget?
We have a budget line from the state, and so it's funded through the university. We also have a foundation account, which gets money in from subscribers and from our institutional. Basically, EBSCO pays royalties essentially, and then we have a few benefactors that give money. That's always a great question. Budgets are tight every year and tighter than previous years, but we're still producing.
Have you considered putting these on CDs?
I haven't actually. It isn't too difficult for me to make them available electronically as full issues. going back to about 2009 when I started. Prior to that, everything, there's really spotty electronic file records. That had to do with the loss of a computer when the general editor left, and the material wasn't maintained. It was, I won't get into that. It's a story that makes me very depressed. But we lost a lot of electronic copies of issues. So to do the old things requires scanning every issue, and some of that has been done, but there's a lot that has not been done.
Sounds like it would be worth the effort.
Yeah, there's so much I would like to do. I would like to have audio clips involved in the website. I'd like to have more feature areas, so that instead of clicking just on issues to find things, that there were actual featured, like here's a section for short fiction, or here's a section for poetry, or what have you. That's all kind of down the line. I do a little bit of that as I can each year. Yeah, much of my general editing time is taken up with communicating with authors, communicating with reviewers, trying to solicit material, talking with book reviewers, and then producing the issues.
Thank you for a great program.
You're very welcome. I hope it was entertaining and interesting.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Marcus, for that. That information is a great program. Some great information there, and I'm sure there's some interesting poems for sure. I did enjoy some of the poems.
Well, it's the easiest thing to read. I didn't think I could read a short story. So the poems were the easiest part to read. I would point out that I'm always taking suggestions, especially for the Delta sources and resources section. And so if anyone knows of something like that, that would be worth profiling, do let me know.
All right. Well, we appreciate you, Marcus. Appreciate you presenting that, and great program. Another great program. See, and next week we will have Mayor Harold Copenhaver. So I think he's going to give a State of the City address sometime next week as well. So we may get a preview of that. Should be a good program. Kind of find out what's going on in the city and what his plans are. Thought for the day. Rotary changes us and those we serve. I believe we can change the world one life at a time. Paul Harris. We will adjourn until next week. So appreciate everyone being here. Hope everybody has a great week.